From the food we eat to the air we breathe, we're constantly absorbing chemicals, toxins, and plastics that could be poisoning us. How much of the information we're getting is real science, and how much is simply fear-mongering? I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream.
Six products I would never allow into my home.
I avoid all endocrine disruptors. Here's how to protect your hormones and take control of your health.
Stop using traditional laundry detergent. It's full of carcinogenic and hormone-disrupting chemicals.
Pesticides, poison.
The fruits ain't safe either, all full of pesticides and probably genetically modified.
Toxic chemicals that can be found in your menstrual products.
We're becoming plastic.
Bag with warm water like this could create billions of microplastic particles in the tea.
A recent study found that the straps of our sports watches contain forever chemicals at an insanely high amount.
Alarmingly high levels of deadly chemicals in over 144 Shein, Temu, and AliExpress clothes.
Rob the jewelry store and tell them make me a grill.
When we scroll through social media, it feels like every day brings a new post revealing how something we use or consume is actually harming us. So today we're looking into the latest research on the health and environmental implications of current consumer trends and breaking down possible practical solutions for those who just want to stay healthy. And for that, we have joining us today Dana Zhaxylykova, an environmental scientist and microplastics researcher. Roxanne, a food scientist known online by her account Hydroxide, and medical doctor Tarek Pacha, a surgeon and urologist who runs My Superhero Foods on Instagram. Thank you all so much for your time. Dr. Tarek, you have over 1 million followers on Instagram, where you and your wife post about food being the ultimate medicine. What would you say are some of the most common toxins we may be ingesting with our foods? Is there a particular chemical or contaminant that concerns you the most right now?
Well, certainly, first, I'd like to make one correction. The brains behind My Superhero Foods, I give all credit to my wife, Haley. She's done a tremendous job running the channel. I'm just a puppet, but I really do appreciate all of her fabulous work, and I want to make sure that she gets recognized. Let's get right into it. Absolutely. I think we can keep it pretty simple. My job is probably more simple than your other guest. It's essentially ultra-processed foods, I think, are absolutely the most dangerous, toxic product that we can actually consume. And that is, let's step back a second and define what an ultra-processed food is. It's basically any food that has ingredients that you can't find in your kitchen. You can't easily go find it in your cupboard or something like that. Second definition would be a food with that's in a package, that is in a box, that has multiple ingredients that you can't even understand or even know how to pronounce them. And the third thing would be fast food. Most fast foods are ultra processed. And this is a massive, massive problem because this is not real food. And essentially the main products or the main things that in them are seed oils. And we can get into these things: seed oils, trans fats, and sugars, which is a whole topic in itself. And I'm happy to kind of hone in to specific questions.
Right, but doctor, I mean, first of all, foods with ingredients that we can't find in our kitchen and foods with a long list of ingredients that we don't understand. It's basically everything, right?
Yes, unfortunately, our kids and our diets are now almost 65 to 70% of the food that we consume are calories from ultra-processed food. And I want to make clear, this is not food. It is some kind of edible substance. There is nothing about it that nourishes us. We are basically becoming sick, not from lack of calories. Actually, we have plenty of calories, but no nourishment. Not only do we not have nourishment, this toxic food leads to metabolic dysfunction. Now, metabolic dysfunction is a fancy word that just says that our bodies, our cells, can't use the energy from this food in an efficient way, much like a car that's given really nasty gas or gas mixed with a bunch of impurities. How do you expect that car to run well or run very long or break down much sooner than it should? So these toxins lead to metabolic dysfunction, which leads to diabetes, fatty liver, liver disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, dementia, and much, much more.
Roxanne, as a food scientist, you actually run an account that rationalizes some of the panic. There are several clips there where you are actually talking about the regulations and the fact that people might be exaggerating in some cases. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, of course. So I think with any level of like online panic or sowing the seeds of, potential problems, there's bound to be some misinformation sprinkled in there that can influence people who are looking for real facts. The concept that there are hidden chemicals in our food in the US and even in Canada is sort of a misconception. I'm talking specifically stuff like food dyes and food additives. One of the main misconceptions I see is that the EU or Europe doesn't use any food dyes or additives, and that's why they're healthy there. But our labeling laws here actually require food dyes and food additives to be disclosed on the label. I think that's why people panic when they see the scary chemical names, but in reality, we are just disclosing it to you. And because there's no layman's terms to summarize these in a way that could be potentially helpful, I think consumers see chemicals and see that as a scary thing rather than understanding that there's a purpose to these additives. They've been many times well studied and well produced in the level of dosages that they use. And I think too, like the European versus US food misconception runs deep. In the EU, they are not required to disclose what food dyes are on the label, so it'll just be labeled under an E code. For example, there's a misconception that Red 40 is banned in the EU. It's not, it's just called E129 there, or Allure Red AC. And on the flip side, there's also food dyes that are banned here in the US that are allowed in the EU, food colors like E153, FD&C Blue 2, and Blue 1. So I do think that a lot of the misinformation is sort of meant to kind of, I think, distract consumers from sort of these larger macro factors that are the reason why we face so many health problems in the US. Macro factors being things like walkability in cities, food accessibility, and reduction of food deserts, having the time and affordability to cook healthy meals to learn about how to do healthy food. I think these macro factors are much larger instances of how our health can be improved.
But would you say that you agree with Dr. Tarek in the sense that these ultra-processed foods represent a danger?
So in regards to ultra-processed foods, I do think that foods that are not nutrient dense are a problem. So, but it's not necessarily because of, how do I explain this? It's not necessarily because that there's like a scary chemical in it. It's more the fact that a lot of these foods are just not very high in macronutrients like protein, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, that sort of thing. So again, it's more focusing on a macro level, because if we banned food dyes tomorrow, like, and every one of them was gone, it's not like our health would improve overnight.
And then, of course, there is... Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Tarek.
Real quickly, ultra-processed food, the problem with ultra-processed foods is the fact of the matter, not only that they're nutrient dense, they are concocted in a way to create food addiction. And what ends up happening is we eat and eat and eat, and it overrides our brain's satiety signals. And I dare anyone to go right now and eat 10 ribeye steaks. You cannot eat 10 ribeye steaks or eat 20 oranges or eat anything real. Our body has a natural compensatory mechanism to allow us to feel satiated, to feel nourished, because our body screams out when we're not getting those macronutrients that she was referring to, such as protein and fiber and all these wonderful nutrients that we don't even know, like the matrix of an apple. Like, you can't tell me a Pop-Tart is the same as an apple. The matrix, the beauty, the fiber, how it comes from the tree and is water from the water from the rain and the sun. These are all things that we have gone away from. We need to return back to restore our health.
Yeah, I guess I just want to say that I agree with what Dr. Tarek is saying. However, it does just go back into that macro versus micro level. I mean, if ultra-processed foods don't have a lot of fiber or protein, of course, the satiety will not be there as much, but there are a large variety of products being produced, protein powder, other things like that, that do increase satiety while being ultra processed. I think there's a level of nuance and a spectrum to this that is meant to be addressed, in my opinion. However, of course, a whole foods diet will always be good. And 10 ribeye steaks has hundreds and hundreds of grams of protein. But I would also argue you can't eat several scoops of protein powder in one sitting due to these macronutrients. So focusing on the macro is very important in this aspect.
And what I want to talk about now, because we're going to continue this conversation about everything that we are ingesting and absorbing and what it's doing to us. And one of the things that kept popping up on these timelines as we're researching for this show is the fact that plastic is everywhere. Recent studies found microplastics in breast milk, in human heart and brain tissue. And obviously, we all know that water is essential for life, but the water we are consuming may also be coming with more things than we expect. Our producer, Sina Halil, explains.
What if I told you we're not just drinking the water in these bottles, but tiny particles of plastic too? Researchers have found that 1 liter of bottled water contains around 250,000 tiny pieces of plastic. See, most of these bottles are made from polyethylene terephthalate, also known as PET. And over time, especially when exposed to heat or sunlight, they start breaking down, shedding these tiny pieces of plastic right into the water. This plastic is also commonly used for food packaging, so technically we're eating it too. We're still learning what micro and nanoplastics could do to our health in the long term, but early research suggests they may be linked to cardiovascular issues like strokes and heart attacks. They could cause inflammation and disrupt our hormones. So, while we might not yet fully understand the long-term effects of microplastics, one thing's for sure, we're consuming them every day.
Donna, that is the core of your research. How exactly is this happening? How are these microplastics basically entering everything and staying in our bodies?
Yeah, I would say that the answer to this question lies in the question itself. As you say, plastic is everywhere. Everything that we interact with on a daily basis, all the objects, or even the clothes that we wear, the personal care products that we put on our skin, even the food that we eat is wrapped around plastic or stored in plastic containers, or has to do with plastic. So because we surround ourselves with plastic objects, this plastic then breaks down into microplastics, and as it doesn't degrade really easily, it stays for decades or even hundreds of years around. So it will enter the environment as in water, soil, or air. And as it enters the environment, it will eventually enter the human food chain. So that's how we ingest microplastics, through food and through air, through water, through basically almost everything.
Dr. Tarek, from a medical perspective, I just want to understand this correctly. Why is the body not eliminating these microplastics naturally? And what are some of the risks that we know at this stage involved with us just keeping all this in our bodies?
Well, we were not evolved or we were not created in a way to be able to eliminate microplastics. Again, this is a creation of this generation or a recent generation, which I'm highly against plastic bottles. I recommend stainless steel or glass, much better for us. And these plastics, unfortunately, when they're heated, are even worse. So you certainly don't want to use like plastic or styrofoam and heat your coffee with. These leach into our body, and unfortunately, they will reside in our body forever. And it's, as the clip showed, we have quite a bit of microplastics, up to almost a credit card or more inside our bodies. And why we think this is important, I can tell you firsthand. I'm seeing the effects of this primarily through, I believe, hormone disruption. I see in my clinic a lot of low testosterone and also problems with fertility. So reduction in fertility and low testosterone are rampant to such an extent that we are now lowering the range of normal. So what it used to be considered normal range is 350 to 1200. Now it's 200 to 800 nanograms per deciliter. So we're actually we're moving the goalpost so we don't diagnose as much low testosterone and also problems with fertility. So this is a major, major problem, this hormone disruption. Our bodies are beautifully designed with the most intricate hormone system. And that's why I'm such a big proponent about how microplastics, as well as, again, I disagree with our panel member, that dyes are important. Artificial dyes do affect our behavior. And it's not so much the toxin is in the dose. If you accumulate a lot over a long period of time, we will start to see, and we are seeing, us break down in real time. I see it every day in my clinic.
Donna, you've been researching this. Why would you say it has taken so long for people to actually wake up to the problem that microplastics represent?
As Dr. Tarek said, it's a quite new research topic. We only been introduced to plastic as a material for 80 years. And in terms of science, it's quite new. And the microplastic research itself is like maybe 15, 20 years, which is also a very, very new topic for the science. So we're only now discovering all these things. Even there is no, for example, there is no standard right now in the labs, in the research on how to quantify and qualify the microplastics. And we're still working on even standardizing the research itself. So it's going to take some years for us to understand everything. And we don't have a lot of people who were exposed to plastic for a long time, because, as I said, again, the material itself, it's quite new.
Obviously, there's...
Might I add one thing real quick?
Sure.
It's a very important concept that we need to be ahead of the science. The science, due to its nature, which I appreciate very much so. Science is the backbone of medicine, backbone of any inquiry, but a lot of times it is delayed 10, 15, 20 years. We have to be ahead of the science. It took the FDA over 25 years to ban trans fat, and my food expert would certainly agree with me that trans fats are absolutely an abomination to our health. Heart disease, stroke, dementia. It took over 25 years for the FDA to get it out of our food, and it's still in our food. If there's less than 0.05 grams of trans fat in a processed food, they don't have to label, they don't have to list it on the label. It'll say 0 trans fat, but in reality, there's at least 0.5 grams. You do not have to report it. And over time, this accumulates and causes massive disturbances in our body.
And obviously, there's a lot of advice out there about what is safe and what is not when it comes to the food we eat, but also the products we use every day. But how much of it is actually true? Cosmetic scientist Jen Novakovic helped us set the record straight on a few items.
This myth is so pervasive that many international cancer societies now have myth pages to debunk it. Though overwhelming evidence does not support the idea that antiperspirants or deodorant causes cancer, or that aluminum specifically in antiperspirants is linked to adverse health outcomes for people who use it, unless they have allergies, and that's a different thing. Sunscreen is good for you, especially if you're thinking about risks for skin cancer. Sunscreen has a health benefit to people in reducing your risk for skin cancer. Also, an array of different skin conditions associated with sun exposure. There's a misconception that they're unsafe, but this is based off of maybe misinterpretations of the total evidence, which overwhelmingly supports the safety of sunscreens on the market. This misconception is based off of a misconception about the phthalates that are used in fragrance and cosmetics in general, and the risks associated with phthalates as a class compared to individual chemicals. So yes, certain phthalates do have endocrine, for example, disrupting impacts in this case, but it's not the one that is relevant to fragrance, which is diethyl phthalate, overwhelmingly supported to be safe, overwhelmingly not supported to be endocrine disrupting in the context of these products. This is based off of the fallacy that natural equals better. But I mean, you just have to think about this for a second. Poison ivy is natural, and if you stick that on your skin, it's maybe not going to be great news for you, especially if you've already had a reaction to it. The reality is, natural ingredients in cosmetics are some of the more challenging ingredients when it comes to safety. And it's not to say that they don't have a place. They're great to work with in formulations, but this blanket idea that natural equals better is misplaced, especially considering the ingredient types that have the highest composition of allergens happen to be in the natural category.
Roxanne, I wanted to bring you back in to ask you about trust. Many people have been talking about losing trust in corporations and in governments. Would you say that that lack of trust, or at least that question around the trust, is justifiable?
Absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I'm a scientist, so I'm always questioning everything around me. And I personally think there can never be too much concern over US regulations or what companies are doing, since, food has to be sold and there is a profit incentive to it. That muddies the waters quite a bit. I think a safe food system is always a work in progress. And I can acknowledge, too, that our food system has wronged people in the past, and I can completely understand a level of mistrust. But in my opinion, I think we do focus on, I think the focus in terms of what we put our attention to is, again, more in that micro rather than the macro. I do think a lot of what gets portrayed as what we should be focusing on is sort of a distraction from these larger goals that would require a lot of systemic change, like walkable cities, not having to check your bank account every time you go to the doctor, food accessibility, that sort of thing.
It's a more holistic approach, I guess. In terms of staying on that line here, because we're almost out of time, in terms of solutions and actions, Dr. Tarek, if someone wanted to take immediate action after watching this episode, what would you recommend as a first step towards being healthier and trying to stay away from things that harm us?
That's a great question. I would say the very first and easiest thing to do is stop all liquid sugar. So that includes putting sugar in your coffee. That includes Coke and pop and artificial sweeteners as well. That's a whole nother topic, and how those are gut disruptors, and they cause us to crave carbohydrates and actually cause us to gain weight and lead to obesity and diabetes. That includes smoothies and juices. I'm not saying fruit juices you can't ever have, like 100% orange juice. They do have some vitamins and minerals in it. If they are done in moderation is okay. But in reality, the biggest single thing you can do is cut liquid sugar. The more, the better. And the second thing I would add, again, from a macro perspective, as Dr. Roxanne was saying, is to limit or reduce as much as possible ultra-processed foods. These are toxins. And if we stop buying these abominations, these concoctions of scientifically engineered foods to cause us to crave and cause us to overeat calories and become obese and overweight and have metabolic dysfunction, they will make better food. I promise. You can start to see better foods being produced, more organic, more whole foods, less ingredients, one ingredient foods. All of this is extremely critical in taking the first steps to better health. Those would be my two suggestions: avoiding liquid sugar in all forms, including smoothies and fruit drinks, pop, of course, and number two, staying away from ultra-processed foods, which are not food, they're just abominations.
Roxanne, your tips today, what would you suggest people do?
I think my number one piece of advice when it comes to staying healthy. Now, for correction, I'm a food scientist, not a nutritionist. I'm also not a doctor. I would recommend going slow. So our media cycle goes so quick nowadays that we see, don't eat this, don't eat that, eat this, eat that. And I think it can be very confusing for a consumer. I think just stepping back and focusing on very pared down, simple goals, like getting enough fiber. We do not get enough fiber here in the US. Getting enough protein, making sure you're focusing on vitamins and minerals, And I think if you start there, that is like sort of the most simplistic and easiest place to start. Getting caught up in health trends can often make things more confusing. So it's really best to just keep it simple.
Roxanne, Dr. Tarek, and Donna, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us here on the stream today. And thank you all for tuning in. Keep in touch with us online. For that, you can use the hashtag or the handle AJStream and send us your questions and suggestions. Take care, and I'll see you soon.